A widely used feature of Express in Node is the Express middleware. So, what do we mean by the Express middleware and how do we use it and what are the benefits? To process the request and generate the response, Express uses middleware to manipulate the request response object or execute any other code. So, we receive the request from the browser, and after processing the request, the response is sent back by the node server to the browser. In between, there is a processing done, and for this processing, Express uses middleware. It is called the middleware because it is executed in the middle of receiving a request and sending back a response. So that is why it is referred to as middleware. Each middleware has access to the request and response objects and the next function. So three things the middleware typically has access to: the request object, the response object, and the next function. At the end of each middleware, a next function is called, which executes the next middleware in the middleware stack. So there could be many middlewares that we have defined. At the end of the execution of, say, any middleware, we will call the next function, which will then execute the next middleware. Middleware are executed in the order they are defined in the code. So in the order that we define them in the code, that is how they will be executed. So diagrammatically, how does it look like? So we get the request, we create the request and the response object that Express creates, and then it goes through each middleware. So it starts with the first middleware. After this middleware has done its job, it will call next, which will now then call the next middleware. This middleware will do its job, and at the end of it, it will call next, and so on till we send the response back to the browser. Remember, we can define any number of middleware, and how do we define it and how do we use it is something we will learn now. So, how do we use the middleware? There are two parts of using the middleware. First is defining the middleware function, and then second is configuring or binding the middleware to the Express app. As we discussed earlier, the middleware function takes three parameters: the request object, the response object, and the next function. It executes its logic, its code, and manipulates the request and the response objects. And at the end of it, it will call the next function. So that is how we define a middleware function. How do we bind the middleware to the app? We use the app.use, where app is the Express app, and pass it to the middleware function. So if we bind it in this fashion, it means this middleware will get executed on all routes. If we specify a route, then it will specifically match this route while getting executed. So /route1, any route that matches this middleware will get executed. Say if there was another route, say /route2, it will not get matched and this middleware will not get executed on that. So this is how we define and use a middleware. Let's do a few exercises and write a bit of code to understand this. Define a middleware function, say hello, that prints hello, new request received on the console, and we test it for get/products, get/orders, and post/orders. So let's go ahead and do this. So what we have here is a standard boilerplate code for using Express, and here our app is the Express app. So you can see here that we have used app.use for express.json. So express.json is one middleware that we have used here, which converts the data that we have received in the body into JSONs. The other that we have used here is defining the headers, the response headers, which give us the control. And because here we did not use this, we did not define it as a function, but we defined it as an inline function, we have called next here. In our standard method, we could have just made this a function and also defined it. So I could have said config headers and put the code here, function. So we could have also defined it in this fashion. So this is exactly the same way, or we could have defined that function within that code here. So let's go back to the standard. So this is our standard boilerplate code. Now what do we need to define? We need to define a middleware function, say hello. Now what are the parameters it takes? It takes the request, response, and the next. And what does it do? It does a console.log hello. What does it say? Let's just check back. Hello, new request received. New request received. And now that we have defined it, this middleware should run for all of our codes. So now that we have defined it, let's configure it. So let me put it here, app.use, say hello. See, I have not given a route, so this will now get executed on all the routes, and it will get executed after the express.json, then this headers, and then this say hello will get executed. So now that we have defined the middleware, let's define our test routes. App.get, the first one is /products function request comma response. And what do we do here? Let's just say response.send, and we send, say, path is /products. And before that, let's just put a console.log in the route /products, get /products. Let's also put that get /products. Similarly, we need to define our other routes. Let's define that. So the next is /orders. So we are in the path route this, and we send this back. So here we could have also called it route. Let's name it route. And what's the third one? We want the app.post /orders. So this is post, and here whatever body we receive, let's send it back. So let's call it, say, data is request.body. As it is a post, we could have received a body, so we are sending back that body. So we have defined our 3 routes. Now let's run this code. So let us now test this code. Let's run the server. And how do we test it? We will just go to Postman, and let's say we create local host, and what is the path? Products. See, we have not gotten a response back. Now, why did we not get a response? If we go back here, we have received the request. So we have gotten this, but why did we not get it? Because we forgot to call the next function. So remember this, if you forget to do it, we will get this error, which is what happened. So let us now test it again. Let me send the request again, and now we have gotten our route /products. And if we go and test here, hello, new request received, and in the route get products. So this middleware got fired, got executed, because we defined it here. Similarly, now let's test it for the others. Let's say define get /orders, and if I send that, we get route /orders. And similarly, hello, new request received, in the route get /orders. Let us test it for the third case, which is the post. So let's just create the post request. And what do we send in the body? Let's just send some data in the body. Say order is equal to, say, mobile. Let's send this. And what do we get as the response? The data and the route and the data. And if we go back and check here, hello, new request received in the route post/orders. So in all the routes, this middleware say hello has gotten executed. Next, what do we want to do? Define a middleware function, say by, that prints by middleware over on the console. Ensure that say by is called after say hello, and test it for the three routes that we defined: get/products, get/orders, post/orders. So let's define a middleware function, say by request comma response comma next. What does it do? It says console.log by middleware over. So we have executed all our middleware. And remember, what do we need to do in the last line of the middleware? Call the next function. So let's call the next function. Next, we need to configure it, and we need to configure it after say hello, so that first say hello gets called and then say bye gets called. Now that we have done it, let's run the server and test it. So let's start with our get products. We call it. So we get hello, new request received by middleware over. So that's the order of execution, and then it went and executed the app.get/. Next, let's check for orders, get orders. So what do we get? Hello, new request received by middleware over in the route get/orders. So exactly the same thing. Let's test it for the post. We get the same data back, and we again get the same prints on the console. Hello, new request received by middleware over in the route post/orders. Next, what do we want to do? Define two middleware functions that print the URL and method of the request. That's what the first middleware function should do. And the second should print the body of the request. The first middleware function is executed for all routes. The second middleware function is executed for the route/orders. And they should be executed between say hello and say bye. And we will test it for get/products, get/orders, and post/orders. So let's do that. So let us define our middleware functions. So let's call, say, the first function is show URL and method. And what does it get? It gets the request, the response, and the next. So let's define it now. So console.log URL is request.url, that is how we can get it, and method is request.method, and at the end of it, let's call the next function. The other middleware is function show body. Again, it gets the request, the response, and the next function. And we will just say a console.log body is request.body. That is how we get the body, and we call the next function. Don't forget to call the next function. Now body is typically a JSON, so let's just use json.stringify so that it is visible as a string. Next, what do we want to do? We need to configure these here. So we will call the app.use show URL method. So this is called for both, for all the routes, and what do we do here? So what was our objective? The second function is executed for the route orders. So the body should be shown for the route slash orders. So app.use, let's define the route it should match, slash orders, and what is the show body. So, and we have defined it between the say hello and the say bye. So this should work fine for us. Let's test it. Let's get the slash products. So we get hello, URL is slash products, method is get, by middleware over in the route get products. So see, this show body did not get called. Let's test it for the get slash products. So we get hello new request received, URL slash orders, method is get, body is an empty JSON, and by middleware over. And then we get into the app.get for slash orders. Let's test it for the post. What do we get? Hello, new request received, URL slash orders, method is post, body is, this is the body we received, by middleware over. So here we can see the order has been, this is the order in which they have been executed, and show body was only called when the route matched slash orders. Next, what do we want to do? Define a middleware function that inserts a JSON in the field user of the request object. So we should create a request.user, and the sample JSON is name is temp, role is guest, and we will test it for get slash products, get slash orders, and post slash orders. So let's define this middleware function insert user request comma response comma next. So what did we want to do here? Request dot user name is temp, role is guest. So this is the JSON we wanted to insert, and we can also put in a console.log inserted in request.user. What did we insert? We will again need to use a JSON.stringify because it's a JSON request.user. And once we have done that, the last line has to be the next function. Next, let's configure it. Where do we configure it? We just configure it at the end. App.use insert user. So we insert this user for everyone. So once we have inserted this user, let's also try and access that user here. So what I can do is in the response, let's also send user is request.user. So we should have received that user. So let's just send it back in the response request.user. So in all the three, we are sending it back so that we can see it. Let's restart the server. And now if we test it in the get, if we call a send, so we get route is slash products, and we get this user name is temp, role is get. So this object, this JSON, we were able to insert into our request object. If we look at our console.log, so we get the hello, new request received, then the URL, then inserted in request.user. This is the JSON we inserted by middleware over, and then we see this. Let's test it for the others. So in get slash orders, again we get this, and if we test here, hello, new request received, URL is slash orders, method is get, body is an empty JSON. We have inserted in request.user and by. And the third test was the post. Let's test it. So here we get the route, the data, and the user. So this is fine. Let's test our console.log. So hello, new request received, URL is this, body was this that we had received in the post. Then we inserted request.user, and then there was this by, and then finally we processed our post slash orders. So this is how we use middleware, and it's a very powerful and a very commonly used technique. It's used for logging, it is used for validation, authentication, and for a lot of generic purposes. So as you keep on developing applications using Node, you will start realizing the power of this middleware. So become very familiar with it and start using it.